February 2nd, 1945. British physicist Klaus Fuchs walks through snow-dusted Santa Fe carrying a manila envelope containing implosion lens calculations, plutonium critical mass specifications, and initiator designs representing 2 years of America's most brilliant scientific work. He enters a quiet side street where Harry Gold waits at a predetermined corner, having traveled from New York for this 3-minute encounter. The wordless exchange. Fuchs hands over the envelope. Gold tucks it into his coat. Both men depart. Will compromise every critical aspect of American bomb design and hand the Soviet Union the blueprint that will end the nuclear monopoly 18 months before the first atomic bomb is tested. This is the story of how Moscow stole the unstealable. When the Manhattan Project began in 1942, it embodied American scientific dominance, secretive, sprawling, and believed impenetrable. The project consumed unprecedented resources, employing over 130,000 people across multiple sites while developing technology that existed only in theoretical physics papers. Los Alamos, established in 1943 on a remote New Mexico mesa under J. Robert Oppenheimer's direction, became the intellectual center. Scientists recruited from universities across America and Britain gathered in this closed city, working behind fences and security checkpoints to solve unprecedented problems, enriching uranium-235 to weapons grade, designing an implosion system to compress plutonium to criticality in microseconds, building deliverable weapons from materials requiring specialized handling. American security planners implemented protocols they believed made penetration impossible. Strict compartmentalization meant scientists knew only what their specific work required. Mail was censored, movements monitored, backgrounds investigated. Los Alamos functioned as a closed city, accessible only through guarded checkpoints. The FBI maintained surveillance on scientists with past leftist associations. General Leslie Groves expressed absolute confidence in these measures, believing security came from controlling information flow and limiting access. What he failed to anticipate was that scientists themselves might view security through a different lens. Some saw compartmentalization as hindering collaboration. Others questioned whether any nation should possess atomic weapons exclusively. A few harbored ideological commitments transcending the wartime alliance against fascism. Soviet intelligence understood these vulnerabilities before American security officials recognized them. Stalin learned of Anglo-American atomic research as early as 1941 through intelligence from the British Tube Alloys program. The NKVD received instructions to penetrate atomic research at all costs. Soviet physicists under Igor Kurchatov had begun their own atomic program, but lagged behind by years, lacking industrial infrastructure for uranium enrichment, theoretical understanding of implosion dynamics, and practical experience with plutonium metallurgy. Espionage offered a shortcut, allowing Soviet scientists to skip failed approaches and focus on proven methods. Moscow assigned its most experienced officers to establish networks in Britain, Canada, and the United States. These officers understood that stealing atomic secrets required not coercion or money, but ideological persuasion. Manhattan Project scientists weren't mercenaries. They were intellectuals with strong political convictions forged during the Depression and Spanish Civil War. Soviet intelligence needed to identify which convictions might prove exploitable. The Depression radicalized a generation of American scientists. Throughout the 1930s, as unemployment ravaged the nation and fascism spread across Europe, many young physicists joined organizations advocating social justice and international cooperation. The American Communist Party attracted intellectuals who viewed socialism as the answer to capitalism's failures. The Soviet Union stood as the primary opponent to Nazi Germany, and after Hitler's 1941 invasion, supporting the USSR became synonymous with supporting the war effort. The Manhattan Project recruited heavily from this pool of Depression-era scientists. Their leftist sympathies were noted, but wartime urgency meant anyone with sufficient talent was deemed acceptable if they posed no immediate security threat. This calculation proved disastrous. The Spanish Civil War particularly impacted future Los Alamos scientists. The conflict represented a clear moral divide: democracy versus fascism, with the Soviet Union supporting the Republican government while Western democracies maintained neutrality. This convinced many that the USSR, despite its flaws, stood on the right side of history. Scientific internationalism provided another vulnerability. The physics community traditionally operated across national boundaries, sharing findings through publications and conferences. The Manhattan Project violated this tradition through classification and communication restrictions. Many scientists found this philosophically offensive, having entered physics to advance human knowledge, not create weapons for a single government. Some rationalized that sharing atomic secrets would restore the international scientific community and prevent monopolistic power. Soviet intelligence began tracking the Manhattan Project before most American scientists knew it existed. NKVD officers monitored physicist recruitment patterns and tracked scientists who disappeared from academic conferences after 1942. By 1943, Soviet intelligence had identified Los Alamos as the primary weapons design facility, allowing Moscow to position assets before security tightened. Klaus Fuchs represented the ideal target: German-born, Communist Party member, brilliant physicist, and someone whose background made him vulnerable to approaches emphasizing anti-fascist solidarity. The cultivation process required patience, distinguishing Soviet intelligence from other services. Officers didn't approach targets with money or blackmail, but built friendships through political meetings and shared concerns about fascism. These relationships developed organically over months or years, with intelligence officers never explicitly requesting espionage until confident of success. An NKVD officer contacted Fuchs through communist networks in Britain in 1941, engaging him in conversations about the war. Only after months did the officer suggest Fuchs might contribute to the Soviet war effort by sharing information. The request was framed as socialist solidarity, helping the USSR defend against Nazi Germany while ensuring no capitalist nation could dominate through atomic monopoly. Fuchs agreed, viewing his decision as ideologically consistent rather than treasonous. American security failures extended beyond inadequate investigations to fundamental misunderstandings about motivation. The FBI and military intelligence focused on detecting enemy agents working for money or under coercion. Their protocols assumed loyalty could be verified through monitoring communications and associations. This framework couldn't identify ideological spies requiring no payment and meeting handlers infrequently using professional tradecraft. Furthermore, compartmentalization was supposed to limit damage from any penetration, but security officials failed to anticipate multiple sources recruited independently, each providing pieces Soviet analysts could assemble into comprehensive understanding. Klaus Fuchs had access to nearly complete bomb design information. Theodore Hall worked on implosion systems from a different perspective. David Greenglass, despite his limited role as a machinist, provided valuable confirmation of assembly details. Together, these sources offered overlapping, cross-verified intelligence, eliminating uncertainty. Groves's confidence in compartmentalization blinded him to actual vulnerability. He believed scientific collaboration could be strictly controlled. In practice, Los Alamos operated more informally. Scientists discussed work over meals, sought input from colleagues in different divisions, and shared calculations to verify results. Oppenheimer encouraged this collaboration. Understanding breakthroughs required open exchange. Scientists repeatedly chose productivity over security. This meant individuals like Fuchs, who held senior positions and wide respect, could access information far beyond formal assignments by asking colleagues questions or attending technical seminars. Travel between Manhattan Project sites created additional exposure points Soviet intelligence exploited. Scientists moved regularly between Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Hanford, and the University of Chicago, carrying technical information as they consulted on bomb development. These trips passed through cities where Soviet handlers arranged meetings. Fuchs traveled to Santa Fe on weekends, where security was minimal. Harry Gold could meet him openly without attracting attention. American counterintelligence never seriously considered that scientists might betray the project, so they never implemented intensive surveillance that might have detected these contacts. By early 1945, Soviet intelligence had achieved penetration so complete that Moscow possessed technical documentation rivaling what American military planners knew. Multiple sources reported independently, allowing cross-verification. When Fuchs described implosion lens geometry, Hall confirmed the same design. When Greenglass provided sketches of mold assemblies, they matched details Fuchs mentioned. This redundancy gave Soviet scientists confidence the intelligence was accurate, not disinformation. Klaus Fuchs was not an obvious espionage candidate. Born in 1911 to a Lutheran minister in Germany, he fled the Nazis in 1933 after his Communist Party membership made him a target. He arrived in Britain as a refugee, completed doctoral work in physics, and by 1941 had established himself as a brilliant theoretical physicist. British security officials noted his communist background, but judged him unlikely to pose any threat. When British scientists were recruited for the Manhattan Project in 1943, Fuchs received security clearance and traveled to Los Alamos, remaining until 1946 working on implosion dynamics with access to virtually every aspect of bomb design. Yet beneath this respectable exterior, Fuchs maintained a commitment to communism transcending his hatred of Nazism. When Soviet intelligence approached him in Britain during 1941, the pitch required no financial inducement. An NKVD officer simply explained the Soviet Union needed scientific information to defend against Nazi Germany and ensure no capitalist power could dominate through atomic monopoly. Fuchs agreed immediately from ideological conviction, viewing himself as serving a higher cause by preventing American hegemony through ensuring Soviet scientists received balancing information. Associates at Los Alamos remembered him as quiet, competent, entirely unremarkable. None suspected he met regularly with Harry Gold in Santa Fe, passing technical documentation that would accelerate Soviet bomb development by years. Theodore Hall presented an entirely different profile. Born in 1925 to a middle-class Jewish family in New York, Hall entered Harvard at 16, demonstrating mathematical abilities marking him as a prodigy. By 18, he had been recruited for Los Alamos, becoming the youngest scientist at the facility, working on implosion method development. Unlike Fuchs, who was recruited, Hall initiated contact himself. He approached Soviet representatives in New York during an October 1944 visit, volunteering his services without prompting. This self-recruitment impressed Soviet intelligence, who understood volunteers motivated by ideology were far more reliable than agents recruited through coercion. Hall's handler, Anatoly Yatskov, established protocols maintaining strict separation from the Fuchs network. Hall provided technical information similar to Fuchs, but from a different organizational perspective, allowing Soviet analysts to cross-verify data. David Greenglass occupied the lowest position in the espionage hierarchy, but provided surprisingly valuable intelligence. A machinist rather than physicist, Greenglass worked in the shop fabricating components for bomb assembly. He lacked theoretical understanding, but his hands-on experience with hardware gave him practical knowledge about how designs translated into physical objects. Greenglass was recruited through family pressure. His brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg, ran a separate espionage network focused on military and industrial intelligence. Rosenberg approached Greenglass in late 1944, appealing to family loyalty and shared political sympathies. Greenglass agreed, though his commitment was less absolute. His wife Ruth served as courier, traveling between Albuquerque and New York with sketches and written descriptions Greenglass produced from memory. While crude compared to Fuchs's sophisticated calculations, Greenglass's sketches offered visual confirmation of design elements, showing how theory translated into hardware. Operating an espionage network inside the Manhattan Project required tradecraft matching the sophistication of the science being stolen. Communication between sources and handlers relied on infrequent personal meetings. Fuchs met Gold roughly every 3 to 4 months in Santa Fe, where scientists went for weekend recreation. Gold traveled from New York by train, arriving on predetermined dates. Recognition signals were simple but effective. Gold carried gloves in one hand, even in warm weather. Fuchs carried a tennis ball or wore a specific colored tie. The meetings lasted only minutes. Fuchs handed over an envelope containing technical documents or notes recreated from memory. Gold asked brief clarifying questions and provided the date and location for their next meeting. Both departed separately. Theodore Hall's network operated differently. Hall met Yatskov during New York trips, plausible as family visits. Yatskov, operating under diplomatic cover at the Soviet consulate, moved freely within the city. Their meetings occurred in public locations where two men conversing briefly drew no notice. Hall's transfer relied heavily on verbal reports, memorizing technical details and recounting them, with Yatskov taking notes. When Hall provided written materials, they consisted of notes from memory, never documents removed from the facility. Document handling presented the greatest operational challenge. Los Alamos maintained strict protocols, with documents tracked and stored in safes. Fuchs solved this through memorization combined with authorized access. His photographic memory allowed him to absorb complex calculations and specifications, which he reproduced from memory at his Santa Fe apartment before meeting Gold. Hall used similar methods. Greenglass relied on sketches drawn from memory of mold assemblies and explosive arrangements, crude but surprisingly accurate. The courier networks operated through multiple stages, compartmentalizing risk. Gold functioned as primary courier for the Fuchs network, working as a chemist in Philadelphia, providing employment cover, explaining frequent absences. After receiving materials from Fuchs, Gold returned to New York and delivered them to Anatoly Yakovlev at the Soviet consulate. Yakovlev forwarded materials through diplomatic pouch to Moscow, arriving within 2 to 3 weeks. The Rosenberg network operated similarly, but with family members as couriers. Moscow Center maintained overall coordination through separate chains of command, reflecting Soviet intelligence's compartmentalization obsession. Lavrenti Beria personally oversaw intelligence collection on atomic weapons. Intelligence reports from Fuchs, Hall, and Greenglass flowed through different channels to Moscow, where analysts compiled them into technical assessments. Igor Kurchatov received these assessments without knowing sources' identities, understanding only that information came from reliable intelligence. This separation protected sources from exposure even within the Soviet system. July 16, 1945. Scientists gather in the New Mexico desert before dawn, preparing to detonate the first atomic bomb. Klaus Fuchs stands among the British delegation at an observation point 10 miles from Ground Zero, watching technicians complete final preparations on Trinity. At 5:29 a.m., the desert erupts in light. Fuchs watches with different thoughts. Understanding the successful test validates everything he's reported and transforms theoretical physics into strategic reality. Within days, he will pass Trinity results to Soviet handlers, confirming implosion dynamics work as calculated. The meeting occurs August 6, 1945, the same day American bombers drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Fuchs travels to Santa Fe carrying technical analysis of the Trinity test, including yield estimates, compression ratios, and observations about implosion timing. Harry Gold waits at their predetermined location, having traveled from New York for this critical handoff. Gold accepts the envelope with minimal conversation. Fuchs mentions a second device will be used soon, this one employing the plutonium implosion design rather than the uranium gun-type weapon dropped on Hiroshima. Gold asks about differences. Fuchs explains briefly, noting the implosion method is more efficient and represents the design Soviet scientists should prioritize. The conversation lasts 3 minutes. Gold's route takes him to Albuquerque, where on June 3rd he had met Greenglass, collecting sketches and descriptions. Moscow requested this specifically for cross-verification. Greenglass's drawings showed explosive lens configurations, dimensional specifications for mold assemblies, and manufacturing tolerances, a machinist's perspective offering practical details theoretical physicists sometimes overlooked. Within hours of reaching New York, Gold contacts Yakovlev, transferring both envelopes. Documents are photographed, encoded, and prepared for transmission via diplomatic pouch. Within 2 weeks of Fuchs handing the envelope to Gold, Soviet physicists in Moscow analyzed Trinity test results, comparing them against theoretical predictions. The information confirms plutonium implosion designs function as theorized, allowing Kurchatov's team to proceed with confidence. August 9, 1945. A second atomic bomb detonates over Nagasaki using the plutonium implosion design Fuchs has been describing for over a year. The explosion validates Soviet intelligence completely. Stalin summons Beria and demands the Soviet Union produce its own atomic bomb within 4 years. The intelligence networks receive new tasking. Continue reporting on American weapon development, but also gather information about production capabilities, stockpile estimates, and delivery systems. Fuchs remains at Los Alamos through 1946, continuing to pass information including early thermonuclear weapon concepts. Soviet scientists analyzed intelligence reports with systematic precision, cross-referencing information from multiple sources and integrating espionage data into weapon development. What they received was not fragmented hints requiring interpretation, but comprehensive technical documentation covering every critical aspect. Fuchs provided complete specifications for plutonium implosion systems, including explosive lens geometry, critical mass calculations, and compression dynamics. His reports detailed how shaped charges must be arranged to produce symmetric implosion waves, compressing plutonium cores to supercritical density within microseconds. Hall's intelligence confirmed these designs from independent perspective. Greenglass contributed practical information about how theoretical designs translated into physical hardware. The implosion lens design represented the most valuable intelligence. American scientists had spent years developing explosive arrangements for uniform plutonium compression. Soviet scientists received this knowledge completely formed, allowing them to skip failed approaches. Fuchs provided exact measurements for lens dimensions, chemical compositions for explosives, and timing requirements for detonators. This level of detail exceeded what Soviet scientists could have developed independently within any reasonable time frame. Critical mass calculations gave Soviet scientists confidence in material requirements and weapon scaling. Fuchs transmitted the minimum plutonium quantity needed to sustain chain reactions under various compression scenarios, along with calculations showing how compression ratio affected yield. This allowed Soviet engineers to planned plutonium production facilities with accurate understanding. Initiator design details showed how American scientists solved the problem of triggering chain reactions at precise moments. Fuchs provided specifications for initiator construction using polonium-210 and beryllium, quantities required, and placement within the core assembly. What the espionage networks didn't provide was complete information about uranium enrichment infrastructure. Fuchs, Hall, and Greenglass worked primarily on plutonium weapon design, giving them limited access to uranium-235 production details. This gap meant Soviet engineers developed uranium enrichment capabilities more independently. Early hydrogen bomb concepts transmitted by Fuchs in 1948 offered preview of thermonuclear development dominating the 1950s. The information was incomplete, but it provided Soviet scientists awareness of coming technological developments and suggested research directions worth pursuing. August 29, 1949, Soviet scientists detonate their first atomic bomb at the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan, 4 years and 4 days after Hiroshima. American intelligence detects the explosion through atmospheric monitoring. The news shocks Washington, where estimates predicted Soviet success would take at least another decade. What American officials don't yet know is how closely the Soviet device matches American designs. Analysis of fallout signatures suggests plutonium implosion, but full understanding of the similarity won't emerge until espionage investigations reveal Los Alamos penetration extent. The discovery process began with signals intelligence. The Venona Project, a secret program to decrypt Soviet intelligence communications, started in 1943. Decryption proved extraordinarily difficult, as Soviet encryption used theoretically unbreakable one-time pads. However, Soviet code clerks made critical errors during the war, reusing pad pages that should have been destroyed. By 1948, decrypts revealed Soviet intelligence had penetrated the Manhattan Project, though identities remained obscured by code names. Charles, MLAD, Rest. Klaus Fuchs came under suspicion in 1949 when British intelligence received information suggesting he maintained contact with Soviet intelligence. British security services interrogated him beginning December 1949. Fuchs maintained innocence through multiple sessions before finally confessing in January 1950. He identified Harry Gold as his courier. Gold's arrest in May 1950 triggered cascade of additional identifications. Under interrogation, Gold described his courier work, including David Greenglass. Greenglass, confronted with evidence in June 1950, agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency for his wife. He implicated Julius Rosenberg. The Rosenberg arrests in July 1950 electrified American media and ignited political firestorm. Their trial in 1951 became political theater. The jury convicted both. Judge Irving Kaufman sentenced them to death, declaring their actions had altered history's course. The Rosenbergs were executed June 19, 1953, the only Americans executed for espionage during peacetime. Debate about their guilt continued until Venona decrypts were declassified in 1995, confirming Julius's extensive espionage while suggesting Ethel's role was more limited. Theodore Hall's identity remained unknown throughout 1950s investigations. The Venona codename MLAD wasn't definitively connected to Hall until the 1990s. Hall lived his entire life without prosecution, working as a physicist in Britain and later returning to the United States. When confronted by journalists in the 1990s about his wartime espionage, he acknowledged his role but expressed no regret, stating he had acted from conviction that nuclear monopoly was dangerous. His case demonstrated Soviet compartmentalization had worked. Klaus Fuchs received 14 years in a British prison, serving 9 before 1959 release, and emigrating immediately to East Germany, where he resumed scientific work until his 1988 death. He never expressed remorse. Harry Gold received 30 years, serving 15 before 1965 parole. He died 7 years later. David Greenglass served slightly more than half of 10 years before disappearing into obscurity under an assumed identity. The security failure triggered investigations extending far beyond prosecuting identified spies. The FBI expanded counterintelligence operations, implementing surveillance programs targeting thousands of scientists, academics, and government employees with past or present leftist associations. Loyalty review boards examined federal workers. Security clearance procedures were systematized, requiring extensive background checks. Polygraph examinations became standard. Academic freedom came under pressure as universities faced demands to dismiss faculty who had belonged to communist organizations. Thousands of careers were damaged by association rather than evidence of actual espionage. J. Robert Oppenheimer's security clearance hearing in 1954 exemplified how anti-communist investigations consumed even those who led American weapon development. Despite directing Los Alamos, his past communist associations and opposition to hydrogen bomb development made him suspect. A security board revoked his clearance after lengthy hearings examining his political views in exhaustive detail. The decision effectively ended his influence despite no evidence of espionage. Strategic implications reshaped American military planning and diplomatic strategy. Nuclear monopoly had provided advantages in forming American policy from 1945 through 1949. The revelation that Moscow possessed nuclear capability years ahead of predictions forced fundamental reassessment. American strategists accelerated hydrogen bomb development. Military budgets increased dramatically. NATO strategy shifted from conventional defense to nuclear deterrence. Civil defense programs attempted to prepare American population for nuclear attack. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction emerged from this new reality. Neither superpower could attack without facing catastrophic retaliation, destroying both societies. This stalemate paradoxically created stability through fear. Leaders understood nuclear war meant mutual annihilation. Proxy wars, conventional force buildups, and espionage became competition tools, while nuclear arsenals grew to levels far exceeding any military requirement. The arms race consumed resources both nations could ill afford. Soviet espionage had not prevented arms competition, but ensured it would occur between rough equals rather than between monopolist and desperate competitor. Long-term consequences extended beyond immediate reforms and strategic adjustments. The network's success demonstrated human intelligence retained primacy even as technical collection methods improved. Satellites could photograph facilities, and signals intelligence could intercept communications, but acquiring design specifications required convincing people with access to share what they knew. The debate about whether atomic espionage prevented American nuclear hegemony or enabled Soviet aggression continued for decades. What remained undisputed was that the scientists who spied fundamentally altered Cold War dynamics, transforming nuclear weapons from American exclusive possession into shared terror, defining superpower relations for 40 years. The KGB's penetration of Los Alamos represented intelligence tradecraft at its most effective, exploiting human beliefs rather than technological vulnerabilities. Military security couldn't protect secrets when individuals with access chose to share them from ideological conviction. Whether they prevented American hegemony or enabled Soviet threat remains debated. What is certain is that their decisions altered the Cold War's trajectory, ensuring nuclear weapons became shared danger rather than monopolistic advantage, and establishing security protocols governing classified research for generations. Thank you for watching this story until the end. The Los Alamos espionage operation remains one of history's most consequential intelligence breaches, proving ideological conviction can compromise even the most secure facilities. If you found this story captivating, please share it with others who appreciate untold history. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the hidden operations that shaped our world. Your support helps us bring these remarkable stories to light. Until next time, stay curious.